Well, we come to the final question in our series, and as I mentioned in one of the earlier videos, I've used these questions in my daily quiet times, asking myself one question each day. And over the course of the week, I cover all of the questions to keep my life on track, to be that navigational beacon that I can live by. So today I want to take you to the very end, the last chapter of Ephesians 6 for our final question. You know, there are a lot of ways that the book of Ephesians has been understood, themes that stand out to different people as they've studied it. One author I read recently said that the dominant theme of the book of Ephesians is that of spiritual warfare, that Ephesus was a place where there was a lot of occult activity, there was a lot of use of magic and seances and magic spells, and that this final section reminds those of us who follow Christ that He is ultimately the most powerful. And so here's my question for you. Am I fully armed for every spiritual battle? Are you fully armed for every spiritual battle that you might face? You know, in this chapter, Ephesians 6 and verse 12, it has this to say, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." You know, it's talking here about the reality of spiritual warfare. As I talk to people about spiritual warfare, I feel like there's two ditches, one on each side of the road. One ditch is that Satan gets blamed for everything, to the point where a person can become very fearful about Satan's involvement in their lives, or they can tend to abdicate the human responsibility they have to make the right choices and to realize those choices have consequences. So there's this ditch of magnifying spiritual warfare until we're intimidated by it or we feel helpless in light of it. On the other side, there's this ditch where we don't believe it's real. So we discount it. And I think when we discount it and we downplay it, we don't end up being alert to that spiritual danger. Well, a verse earlier, it tells us Satan has some schemes. It says this, "Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes." The word there is the word we get method from. So you can take your stand against the devil's methods. What are some of those methods he uses when he tries to work against us in our lives? Well, I think one of the most fundamental ones is exhaustion. I don't know about you, but when I'm physically tired, I end up being tempted by things. I end up by reacting in ways that I wouldn't normally react or be tempted by. But there's not only physical tiredness, there's an emotional tiredness, there's a spiritual weariness that can set us up for defeat. He loves to use exhaustion. He loves to use deception to get us thinking, you know, the grass is greener on the other side of the fence, and deceiving us with fantasies that replace the realities of life. And of course, this is a big one. The Bible tells us Satan is an accuser, so he uses accusation. He likes to convince us we're losers. You remember the big L on the forehead type of thing? He likes to convince us we're spiritual losers, and when we face challenges, we really can't hope for victory. But there's also what I would call the exploitation of footholds in our lives. You know, if we're honest, all of us have spiritual Achilles heels. Weaknesses, places that are kind of unique to us where Satan can get a grip on us. A friend of mine called these our signature issues that Satan tries to use to defeat us. Quite frankly, mine is something that's plagued me, and I don't know why. I grew up in a loving home, affirming parents, a church that encouraged me. But somewhere along the way, I picked up insecurity. And that led early in my marriage to jealousy. It led early in my ministry to a workaholism and trying to please everyone and trying to be there all the time for everybody. And every once in a while today, it still rears its ugly head. And so I have to especially be on guard because Satan loves to exploit that insecurity for his purposes. You know, John Wesley, who lived a few hundred years ago and still shapes the Wesleyan church movement today, used to get people together in bands, in small groups, so that they could help each other overcome those points of connection and contact that the enemy would try to get in their lives. Now, verse 10 reminds us, finally, be strong in the Lord and in His mighty power. You remember earlier when we looked at Paul's prayers and how he prayed with such optimistic grace? We can be reminded that all the power we need is available to us so that we can stand strong in His mighty power. So, are you fully armed for every spiritual battle?